Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Potpourri for this time. Today we have John Ottens, who's going to be presenting us here, the mountain man. He's known as the mountain man with the fancy hat. So he's been doing these presentations at the schools and stuff throughout the valley, and I believe state also. And he's been doing this for quite a long time. So he says this is probably going to be his last one that he's going to do. So you got a treat here today. This is probably the last one that's going to be done. So he's going to talk about the things that he's here on the tables and many of the other things here. So we're going to turn the time over to him now to go ahead and do his presentation.
Yeah, I started out doing this for the 4th and 7th graders about 20 years ago. I probably talked to 120,000 kids. I do 20 to 30 schools a year. This is a Indian flute, or they call it Native American anymore. We all learned it as Indians when we were kids. And this is something he could do when he was sitting around the campfire at night. So I'll play it a little bit so the people at home can see what's happening, what it sounds like. So it got a nice mellow tone. This is my fancy hat. That's my mountain man name. I was up at Bridger and walking around one day, and some little lady looked up at me and says, "That's a mighty fancy bonnet you've got on." She was from Ireland. So I took that as my name because I was going to kids. Some of the other names would not be appropriate for young ears. Mountain man probably would have worn a hat more like this. Much better for what he's doing up in the mountains. Keeps the rain, the snow, and the sun off of him. So this would be a much better hat for him to wear. He might have had a coat like this, probably would have had a coat similar to this. This is called a capote, and a capote is made out of a wool blanket. Might work if I put it on the right side out, huh? And the reason they made them out of a wool blanket, let me move out here so it's easier to see, is wool has this thing about it that even if it gets wet, it will stay warm. So with a wool blanket coat, he could stay warm even with the little snow that melts on his shoulders, because it wouldn't get cold from being damp. He may have had a coat like this, called a frock coat or fringed coat. It gets the right side out here too. It looks sort of fancy. I guess I had it right side out. Looks sort of fancy with all the fringe on it. But the fringe has a purpose. He didn't have a raincoat that would stay wet, so when it rained, he would get wet. But after it quit raining, with all the fringe, the water would kind of run down in the cloth and get in the fringe. And there's so much surface area in the fringe, it would make the coat dry a whole lot faster. So the fringe was there to make the coat dry faster when it did get wet. The other clothes I'm wearing, mountain man probably would have started out with a set of boots made by a boot maker, but they would wear out. He'd have to have something on his feet, so he'd make moccasins or have somebody make him moccasins. My moccasins happened to be made out of buffalo leather. Leather is the skin of the animal with the hair scraped off and tanned to make it nice and soft. My pants are just cowhide, but he would have probably started out with a pair of wool pants. And the wool pants would have worn out. He'd have to make those pants out of what he had. He didn't have pockets in his pants, so he'd have to have his possibles bag. Just like his pocket. He'd carry his flint, steel, char cloth, caps for the gun, patches for the gun, things he needed for his daily life, salt, pepper, whatever he needed.
What did he call it?
A possibles bag. And my possibles bag happens to be made out of elk leather. The little bag here is a medicines bag, something he probably would have picked up living with the Indians. Some of the things that may have been in his bag, but there were things that had special meaning to him mostly. I've got in mine a little bit of dirt from home. I can't get homesick when I'm wearing it. I'm already right next to a piece of home. So I've always got a little piece of home right next to me. I have an earth stone. Remind me that Mother Earth provides everything for us. She brings us our water in the river. She raises the animals we eat and the grains we eat. I have a healing stone. Help me stay well when I am well and help me get well when I'm not. Maybe he had a worry doll, have a big problem. He could tell it to the worry doll. Then the worry doll could sit there and worry about it. He didn't have to worry about it anymore. Maybe he had a little seashell. Remind him that all the water we have here on earth is here, that we don't get any more. We got to kind of take care of what we have. Indian boy would have had an arrowhead in his. This would have been from his manhood hunt. He got to a certain stage in his life. They'd send him out to live in the wilderness for a month or two by himself. When he came back, he was considered a man of the tribe. So he would be a full member of the tribe at that time. The beads here are called African trade beads. They were traded with the Indians here in this country also. It's on a bear claw necklace. The little green one here is called a fetish or good luck charm. I've got a buffalo fetish. The blue stones are turquoise. The black stones are called Apache tears. Choker here is another thing he would have picked up with the Indians. 1 or 2 rows of beads were for the ladies, 3, 4, or 5 rows were for the men, and told them it indicated their status in the tribe. So that's what I'm wearing. There's some bead work done with some seed beads, it's called, by the Indians. This one's supposed to have 10,000 beads on it. My top hat has 7,722 beads on it. There were so many. He would probably marry into a tribe and live with the tribe for the most part, but he wouldn't dress with the tribe's symbols and stuff, because if he went into some other area that was at odds with the tribe he lived in, was with, it couldn't be good for him. So he would dress separate from what the tribe was, but he could have been raised a family and everything. So, like I said, some of the things he carried in his possibles bag was a piece of steel called a striker. And he would have some flint and some stuff called char cloth. Char cloth is cotton cloth that has been baked a long time. It's not burnt, it's just baked a long time and charred out. So it's still cloth if I close my hand. He'd put it someplace, take his piece of flint, and a steel, go like that. Catch one of those pieces of sparks in the cloth, it would sit there and glow just like a piece of charcoal barbecue. He would take that, set it in some crunched up juniper bark, some dry rotten wood, grass, old bird's nest if he could find one. Blow on it gently and he'd have a fire. He didn't have matches. But it wasn't just the stint that he could use. He could look around the mountain and find the most common rock on the planet, quartz. I'll see if I can get a spark off of this. It's been beat on so much, it's all rounded and it doesn't spark well. Or maybe a piece of obsidian, volcanic glass. Or rhyolite. And this is argillite, I think is what somebody told me. So it's a rock is actually chipping a little piece of steel. And the steel is what is red hot. It comes off so fast. It is what is hot and makes the fire. Sometimes he would turn his, get the blacksmith to turn his striker into a knife also. Get 2 uses out of the piece of steel. Much more valuable as a trade item if you could get more uses out of it. Sometimes he would he'd have his knife for skinning the animals. Sometimes he'd have to trade it off to an Indian chief to trap on their land because steel was very desirable. He'd have to use a flint knife or obsidian knife. The reason they like the flint knife or obsidian knife, I do that with the flint knife and there'd be a pile of glass on the floor. It's broke, it would be breaking. They like the steel knife, it was sharp enough to do everything they wanted to do, but it didn't break, it was more durable. When he was traveling, he may have wanted some water. This is my canteen made out of a gourd. Gourd is a lot like a pumpkin, only it has a very thin skin. They'd take a place, put a place to drink out of it, way to carry it, scrape all the vines and seeds out of the inside of it. Then they'd take some beeswax and pour it on the inside, coat the inside with beeswax, and it'd make it waterproof. It'd also make the water taste like honey rather than like a gourd. Also, when he was traveling, he may have wanted some sunglasses. So his sunglasses would be like that. Some of them were quite well educated. And if they needed reading glasses, they might have been like this one. Sometimes he would lose his flint and steel or have to trade it off. He'd have to I'm missing something somewhere. Oh, well, we'll find it later. You'd have to fire the hard way. I don't know if I can get some smoke to come out of this or not, but we'll give it a try. He'd have his bow, fire bow. Yeah, there's a little puff of smoke. Do that a little longer. He'd have a pile of red hot embers on the floor. He could put that in his grass or tinder and have it fire. A lot more work. He'd have his tomahawk, probably the most valuable tool he could have for his survival. It's made of steel. He could find a rock and make a spark for a fire. They could chop the kindling wood for the fire, chop the larger wood for the fire, chop some nice soft pine boughs and make a soft bed to sleep on, chop the larger branches, excuse me, so they could sleep under a roof. He could make a lance or a spear with it to protect himself, and he can use it to protect himself. Many, many uses for the tomahawk or hatchet up in the mountains. Still one of the best survival tools you can come up with. He had his rifle or long gun for him to use it. He'd have a powder measure and a powder horn. He'd put some powder in the powder measure, put it in the barrel. Take a piece of cloth called patch, put it over there. Take his bullet, which is a round ball of lead, put it on there, knock it down flat. Take his ramrod and push everything down to the bottom. What? Well, they cut the extra patch off. It sealed the ball in the barrel, held the ball in. The ball is slightly smaller than the barrel. So it helped keep the ball in. If you tip the gun the wrong direction, balls around it would roll right out. The patch kept the ball in there. I should have mentioned that. The little knife here is called a patch knife, and that's what they cut the extra patch off with. It's been a while since I've done this, so please forgive me if I forget something along the line or get it out of sequence. After he had the charge in the gun, he would pull that back to half cock. That's like looking for a contact lens. I'll find it later.
Have you actually shot something with that gun? A
No,
live-
I hunted, but I didn't hunt with this gun. I tried, but I didn't find the animal on time. Now, if you notice, my gun has two triggers. The front trigger sets the gun off. The back trigger is called a set trigger. When you pull the set trigger, it makes that front trigger very, very sensitive. You just barely touch it. And it goes up. That woke him up, didn't it? He would have also had a pistol. He would have maybe left his rifle on shore. He could stick the pistol in his breeches and go out and set his traps and still have some protection. This is a flintlock. Whoops. It loads through the muzzle the same way the other one did. I'll have to find that ramrod here in a minute. Might have gotten caught in the pants. Oh, well, I'll find it. For him to use this one, he'd pull it back to half cock. This little door is called a frizzen. Underneath the frizzen, there's a little pan or little hollow spot. He'd put some fine powder in that, put the frizzen down that way. If he tipped the gun, it didn't lose the charge. When he got ready to shoot, he'd pull it back to full charge. When he pulled the trigger would, the hammer and flint would go down, hit the frizzen, make a spark that went into the barrel, and it would go off. So it was just a spark that set that one off. Mountain Man did his trapping in the fall and winter. So he'd need a nice pair of mittens. Mittens are warmer than gloves because one finger helps the other fingers stay warm because there's nothing in between them and there's no cold. So he'd have a nice pair of mittens. He'd have a pair of these snowshoes. He could walk on 6 feet of snow and only sink in about a foot or 6 inches or so and not go all the way to the bottom. He did most of his hunting in the fall and winter. So things that he would, his trapping. So things that he would hunted for food would have been a deer. The light brown one under here is an elk. The dark brown one here is a buffalo. This is a piece of caribou up north, very thick fur. You can see why it can live up in the very cold. Stone sheep lives way up high in the mountains, member of the bighorn sheep family. This is a little piece of antelope, pronghorn antelope out here on the desert, very light, airy fur. You can tell it lives where it's hot. He probably would have eaten a lot of rabbit, something he could have caught year round. Then there were some animals that he would have had to hunt because they'd come into his camp and steal things out of his camp. So he might have to hunt the raccoon. The skunk, I'm sorry, or the raccoon. I was thinking ahead of myself. Other animals that he would have seen around were the badger, maybe a possum. Around the beaver pond, he probably would have seen some otters. Nice, keep you dry hat. Around the beaver pond, he would have seen some muskrat. Very small little water animal. Very friendly with the beaver, even sleep in the beaver's lodge once in a while. And he would have seen some beavers. Now, a beaver to a mountain man was worth like $5, which doesn't sound like a tremendous amount of money today. But 200 years ago, it was worth a small fortune, like $350 or so in our money today. 2 ways they were using the beaver. They'd cut the hair off to where it was about 1/4 of an inch long, and they'd mix it with sheep hair and human hair, whatever they could find, and put it in a steam press and make felt out of it. When you heat it and press it together with steam, it curls up around each other and makes felt. So it made a felt hat. They'd take the beaver pelt after that and make a leather hat out of it, dye the leather black with a little hair on it, and make a beaver hat with this little short hair on it. Or they could take the hair completely off and make just a leather hat out of it. What?
You know, like a pole, I think the pole that you, is that made out of?
No,
Something like that.
no, the capote wasn't made out of it's just sheep, regular wool, sheep wool. They made that, they saved the beaver for the hats because the beaver hair in the hats holds the hat shape in bad weather. A sheepskin felt will get wet and droop and look bad, but the beaver fur is thick enough that it makes the hat hold its shape in bad weather. So even the cowboy hats today have beaver felt in. They use beaver felt because of the quality of the fur and the quality of the hat when it's made. This is a little larger beaver. This is a beaver tail, and it is just one side. His beaver tail is about as thick as my hand. You had a question.
The beaver hat, that's Abraham Lincoln's hat, isn't it? That tall hat?
It is what?
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, it's like Abraham Lincoln's hat.
The, ki-
Mine isn't. I have seen them that
Okay.
are.
no,
I can't afford them.
right,
They're quite expensive anymore.
right. And it's smooth like silk
Yeah.
with all that teeny hairs in there.
Yeah, in 1840, the silk hat came along and kind of displaced the beaver hats as formal wear because it was cheaper, lighter, and looked just as well and held its shape in bad weather as well as the beaver hats did. Other animals that he would have caught when he went to rendezvous might have been mink. These are all the same animal. These are all the same animal, just different color hair. These were on ladies' coat up around the collar like that for decoration at one time. So they've got some little glass eyes in them.
Have you been out in the wilds?
This one is a marten. Oh, what's this one called? No, it's. Huh? Ermine, yeah. That just floated off somewhere, the name.
Just wondering where you've been out in the wilds, maybe Alaska or,
I have not. I'd go up deer hunting when I was younger. I'm 82 now,
yeah.
and I don't do much hunting now. But I just did hunting for deer and elk mostly.
Yeah.
Most of these I got at gun shows, rendezvous, taxidermists, auctions, all kinds of places, wherever I could find them and bring them to what was to show the kids when I was talking to the kids. They're touchy-feely, so yeah. This one is a kit fox. That's a full-grown fox, very, very soft hair. This one is a black fox. It was made into a wrap for a lady to wear like that. So it has some glass eyes and it has a clip like a scarf, only it's a lot warmer than a scarf. This one is a red fox. And my fox hat. Pardon? Not very much, not anymore. This one is an Arctic fox. Mother Nature gave it some of the warmest fur of any one animal on the planet because it's such a small animal living in such a cold place. This is a coyote. And then I have his cousin, the wolf. Wolves are a big dog, big canine. I have a wolverine. And a bobcat. Under here, I have a mountain lion, cougar, puma, mountain cat. Lots of names for the same animal. It's just where he was at the time he was hunted. And then I have the black bear with his nice claws. His claws are the same as your fingernails. The only thing that makes them so strong is our fingernails are flat. His are just folded like that, and it just gives them all that much more strength. I got to get the right one out of there.
Watch your fingers.
I don't need them all out. Where's that other one? I think that one will do. Okay, he was a trapper also. So some of the traps that he might have used might have been one like this. Okay. Now, he was a trapper as well as a hunter. So he'd have his trap like this. When he came to a beaver pond, he'd have a trap line. And when he came to a beaver pond, he'd see where the animal was going in and out of the water. He'd go out in his pond and put a stake in that ring. On here, he'd have a little piece of rope, on the other end of the rope, a little piece of wood. Up on shore, he would put musk or castor on something, and when he was gone, the beaver that owned the pond would come out and smell that castor and think, who's that stranger in my house? Because the whole beaver pond's his house. And he'd swim over there and he'd step on that and be caught. Now, it didn't hurt him too bad, but it was holding him. No animal likes to be held, their feet held. So he'd swim out into the pond as far as he could. He was happy out there until he had to come up for air. When he had to come up for air, he would drown. Doesn't sound very nice, but it had two advantages for the mountain man. The beaver was underwater. That meant a wolf, coyote, bobcat, wanted something, wouldn't come along and eat it before he could get back. And he wouldn't have to beat it or damage the pelt to be able to salvage the pelt. So when he came back, he grabbed that little piece of wood, bring it back to shore, skin the animal out, have a nice pelt to take to rendezvous. Thank you. This is a small trap, mink, weasel, ermine. You'd see where one was going down to the stream to get a drink of water, dig a little hole in the snow or in the dirt or whatever, cover it up with some leaves or snow or whatever you could find, hang a piece of meat up here in the tree. The animal would come along, try to get the meat. Pretty soon he'd step on that and he'd be caught. Now, it wasn't a very strong trap, but it has this extra spring that comes up and keeps the trap from being opened. So the animal was caught. This is a little more modern trap, and they can catch anything the last one could catch. They could even set it on the ground like that, put some grain underneath it. Pheasant, chucker, sage hen come along and start pecking at the grain. Pretty soon it'll hit one of those wires and the trap will jump up and catch them. I'm not going to stick my finger. That's why I use the shorter board so I could not trip the trap. This is a wolf, bobcat, coyote trap. As you can see, it's got some teeth in it. And you see what it does to sticks, so you can figure out what it would do to your finger. And it's a jump trap also. It'll jump up a little bit. Now, after he had all his pelts together, he would go to rendezvous. When he went to rendezvous, he would sell those pelts and get things he needed for next year's trapping. Maybe more traps. Maybe he'd buy some trade items like flint for the Indians. They would love the piece of flint. Beads. The ladies love the beads. If you've ever gone to a rendezvous, there will be one at Thanksgiving up at Fort Buenaventura in Ogden. And I don't know if they have a powwow there, but if you get to a powwow, you've never seen such beadwork. They have beadwork that's this wide and 8 feet long. It's beautiful. And they'd go to the rendezvous, they'd sell their pelts, they'd buy stuff for next year, maybe a tent, maybe get a horse so they could get around a lot easier, whatever they needed for next year. At this year's rendezvous, they would say, well, we're at Bridger this year. Why don't we meet at Three Forks on the Bear next year? So for a whole year before they went to rendezvous, they had an idea where they were going to meet. They didn't have telephones, telegraphs, and cell phones. They had to use word of mouth. So they knew a year ahead where that next rendezvous was going to be. So if you've got some questions, I'll answer some questions.
There's one.
Raise your hand if you got a question at home or unmute your mic.
There's one at Fort Bridger at Labor Day.
Yes, there's one at Bridger
been
Labor
there.
Day,
And what's the name of the one by Ogden?
Fort Buenaventura is in the park in Ogden.
East side of Ogden.
And there's one 2 weeks later out in Tooele. And they have powwows out there and a rock and gem show and shooting and the Mountain Man Rendezvous.
And the Indians come, all kinds of people come to the one in Fort Bridger.
Oh, yes. If you go to Fort Bridger and wear Levi's and a t-shirt, you're gonna have to pay to get in. You wear a cotton shirt and baggy cotton pants and some leather suspenders or something, and they'll let you in for free. Because you're period dress. If you're period dressed, you go in for free, and if you're not period dressed, you gotta pay.
And it's a gathering place for the LDS too, because it was where they were in a snowstorm.
Yeah, well, no store, the ones that were in a snowstorm, the party, maybe were in one there too, but they also going over Donner Pass in California is where they had a big snow, where they had the Donner Party got stuck in the snow, an early storm.
So they're LDS people and mountain men and Indians and soldiers, because there were soldiers there too.
Mhm,
So there's all kinds of people there. It's really
mhm.
fascinating.
I have a question. This is Claire Peterson.
Go ahead, Claire.
I'd like to know where this man was born. And has he been a mountain man, or why is he interested in this? Does he have ancestors who have been mountain men?
No, I don't have any ancestry that were mountain men. About 45, 50 years ago, a friend of mine said, let's go to a rendezvous or a Black Powder Club meeting, and we went to a rendezvous down in Dog Valley, which is west of Nephi, and I just got interested in it, and I started collecting the furs. And about 20 years ago, I started going to the schools to talk to the kids about mountain men, and I've talked to about 120,000 kids over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Tell us about the mountain man's family. You know, they had wives that were, as far as I know, when my studies of mountain men, because I've been doing that down
Well, they
in
would
Mexico.
marry- quite often they'd marry into an Indian tribe and
true.
have a family as part of the Indian tribe, become part of the tribe.
They'd be part of the tribe, and
Yeah.
the mountain women were the ones that handled all the bartering, if I understand correctly. Many times that they were the money people at the rendezvous. Tell us what goes on in a rendezvous. What does a rendezvous actually happen? What is it?
The what?
What is a rendezvous? What happens at a rendezvous?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm having trouble understanding what you say with your mask on, because I'm
Sorry,
almost deaf.
sorry. What happens at a rendezvous?
At a rendezvous, they will sell their pelts
Okay,
to the fur traders who haul them all the way back to France and England and wherever.
They come to trade.
And they will take the money and they'll buy traps and tents and horses and anything they can use next year. Supplies that they cannot find in nature, like salt, pepper, flour, coffee, things like that. The what? Alcohol. They got drunk, yes. They'd have parties, they'd have prostitutes there. They did everything to get every bit of their money back when they sold, when they got their furs sold.
Probably the
They had
most,
shooting matches, they had knife throwing matches. Pardon? Horse racing, probably.
Dave Johnson has a question.
it's a comment. If we're making a comparison, probably a close thing to it would be our farmers markets today. They don't just sell produce, they sell all kinds of things.
Yeah,
Trading. It's a trade.
Who did the beadwork? Was it the women?
for the most part, yes. This beadwork was done by the women. Now, the beadwork on my hat, or hats, I should say, I did this beadwork myself. The ladies did the beadwork with a loom, which is about this wide and about yay long, and they would say, okay, I'm making this pattern, I need 7 white beads, and they'd pick up 7 white beads, put them on a long needle, put it underneath the strings on the loom, push them up in the top, pull the needle out, go across the top of the strings, and pull it tight. That would make the beads where they couldn't fall out. Then they do the same thing. I need 1 red bead because I got it center. They'd always use a odd number. You cannot have a dead center bead if you have 2. So they'd have an odd number, 6 on each side with 1 in the middle, 13 beads. Then there is loomless beadwork, where you put the needle through a bead here, come up, put it through another bead, go down through 2 beads, come up, go through another bead, go down and sew 1 at a time. That's what this is. It's so durable, I can take a pair of scissors and cut it in half right there and whip each end of it and it'll never fall apart. The loom bead work like this, if you cut any part of it, it's going to fall apart. So it's a lot more durable, but it's a lot slower to do.
What is it called, just south of Logan? It's a permanent rendezvous, isn't it? Location there?
I think the University of Utah has a rendezvous type thing up there. And I've been up to that one, but I don't remember the name of it. It's been quite a few years.
That would be the Western Heritage Center.
Yeah.
Yes, I have 2 questions. Is that blue beaded work there, is that Navajo? It doesn't look like Navajo. You know what tribe?
I don't know. I don't know who did this work.
Okay,
I was at a gun show and they had it and I liked the
It's
pattern
beautiful.
on it and it's beautiful as far as I'm concerned.
looks like an Eastern tribe. I wanted to ask one more question
This
too. Fast one.
eagle is a beautiful piece.
Yes.
I have no idea which
Oh, okay.
tribe.
Is there a law
The
against,
Anasazis do a lot of rock work also. They do a lot of inlay work on rocks.
is there a law against certain animals? You can't hunt them anymore.
Not right now. The wolf has been on the no hunt list because they were reintroducing them, but they've taken them off. But as far as I know, they just have hunting seasons to keep the animals in check.
What are the beads made out of?
Glass.
Glass.
They're Flemish beads. Were made in, wherever Flemish is, France or somewhere around in there. They make the beads and they bring them over. These beads were also made in Europe and they were traded, like I say, with the Africans in Africa, but they were traded here also. They would be highly prized. They'd trade 2 or 3 pelts for 1 bead.
Cache Valley where Logan is, used to be a land of lots of beaver, right?
Mhm.
And it's called Cache Valley because the mountain men would cache or hide their beaver that they caught under the ground.
Yes, they would wrap them in a buffalo hide. They'd usually use a horse corral or something like that. Dig a hole, plant them in the horse corral somewhere. And cover them up, and then the horses would obliterate any knowledge of where that pile of furs were. They'd know where they were, but nobody else could find them, and it just looked like any other part of the pasture.
And they were very valuable because in England, I know a lot of people had beaver coats and beaver hats.
Mhm.
And beaver hats looked like were tall hats like Abraham Lincoln's.
Mhm.
I have a neighbor, Fred Gowans. Are you familiar with him? He's a
I
mountain
might.
man and has written books and done studies of I don't think they're called anyhow, the Indians that have the Appaloosa horse. He's written a book on them and on the grizzly. So and he's very well versed with the mountain man, and he usually goes to all of these also. Maybe you might have run across him.
I haven't that I can remember.
Okay.
Well,
Any more questions?
if you'd like to come up and look at my stuff, be my guest. You can see what the furs feel like. I hope you enjoyed what I did today.